Let's take a moment and examine the organization of the digestive system, primarily the organization of the walls of the alimentary canal and the layers that compose those walls. So just like we saw with the heart and with the lungs, many of the structures of the alimentary canal are surrounded by a serous membrane that's referred to as the peritoneum. This is a double-walled membrane that contains fluid, and this membrane helps to reduce friction as the muscles that are located within the walls of the alimentary canal generate movement as they relax and contract. The serous membranes of the abdominal cavity are very similar to the serous membranes that we saw surrounding the heart and the lungs. We see a layer that's referred to as the visceral peritoneum that rests on the superficial surface of most of the digestive system organs, and the other part is the parietal peritoneum that makes contact with the walls of the abdominal cavity. The peritoneal cavity is the fluid-filled space that exists between the parietal and visceral layers of the peritoneum. The fluid in the peritoneal cavity functions to lubricate the organs because their muscular contractions do create movement. And the fluid also helps to reduce friction during movements of the alimentary canal. Many digestive organs are anchored to the dorsal or the posterior part of the body wall by a structure that's called the dorsal mesentery. The mesentery is a structure created by the fused layers of the peritoneum. It extends from the body wall to the digestive organs, and it functions to anchor the organs, provide a route for blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatic vessels, and it also stores fat, which can be used as an energy source by the body. Organs that are located within the peritoneum are referred to as intraperitoneal organs. Some organs, such as the liver, are suspended from the body wall by a structure called the ventral mesentery. Any digestive organs that are located outside of the peritoneum are referred to as retroperitoneal organs. And these organs include the pancreas, the duodenum, which is the initial segment of the small intestine, as well as segments of the large intestine. Now let's examine the structures that compose the walls of the alimentary canal and the digestive organs. So the digestive organs contain 4 layers that are referred to as tunics. There is a mucosa, a submucosa, a muscularis externa, as well as a serosa. The mucosa is the tunic layer that lines the lumen, and the lumen is the space that food passes through. The mucosa functions to secrete mucus, enzymes, and hormones, and we'll see some examples of these hormones later on. The mucosa also functions to absorb the end products of digestion, that is, it contains blood vessels. We'll also see that it contains lymphatic tissues that protect against infection, and we'll also see that the mucosa contains 3 sublayers, which we're going to explore right now. The sublayers are the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. The epithelium of the mouth, the esophagus, and the anus is a stratified squamous epithelium, while in the small intestine and the large intestine, the epithelium is a simple columnar epithelium. We see that it secretes mucus, which eases the passage of food through the alimentary canal, and that mucus also protects the digestive system organs from various digestive enzymes that are secreted into the lumen. The lamina propria is a structure that contains areolar connective tissue, and recall that areolar connective tissue is a tissue that contains lots of capillaries. The lamina propria is the major layer that absorbs nutrients from the lumen of the gastrointestinal tract. The lamina propria also contains lymphoid follicles that we mentioned earlier to defend against infection. This tissue is referred to as the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. So moving on to the muscularis mucosa, we see that this layer contains smooth muscle tissue. And the muscularis mucosa produces local movements of the mucosa. Generally, it does not produce the peristalsis and the segmentation that we discussed in a previous segment. That's the job of the muscularis externa. So the submucosa consists of a mixture of areolar connective tissue and abundant elastic connective tissue. The areolar connective tissue contains blood vessels that nourish the muscularis mucosa as well as the muscularis externa, while the blood vessels here do not function in absorption of nutrients from the lumen of the alimentary canal. Those are the functions of the blood vessels that are in the lamina propria. Meanwhile, the elastic connective tissue permits stretching of the alimentary canal after a large meal. The muscularis externa is a layer that is responsible for both segmentation and peristalsis. The muscle fibers or cells that are in the longitudinal layer of the muscularis externa run lengthwise, and they pull the alimentary canal so that it shortens when they contract. Meanwhile, the muscle fibers that are in the circular layer of the muscularis externa run around the circumference of the alimentary canal, so that contraction of these muscles constricts the diameter of the alimentary canal. And finally, the serosa is the term often used for the visceral peritoneum. So the serosa and the visceral peritoneum are the same layer. So we see that the serosa contains two tissues, the areolar connective tissue, which is covered with an epithelial tissue that is usually referred to as the mesothelium. Around the esophagus, the serosa is replaced by a structure or a tissue that's referred to as the adventitia. And the adventitia is formed from fibrous connective tissue, and it functions to anchor the esophagus to nearby structures.